We also have Lauren Kuby. She's a sustainability scientist at Arizona State University and a recognized expert nationally on climate action and clean energy. She has served on the board of the nonpartisan Arizona Municipal Water Users Association from 2015 to 2020. She was also a two-term council member and former vice mayor of the city of Tempe, and she is currently running for the Arizona Corporation Commission. And lastly, we have Martin Casada. He is a public policy expert and a practicing attorney. His experience spans multiple areas: law, community activism, school board service, the Arizona legislature. He's served since 2012, and he has a breadth of experience that gives him a really unique understanding of how Arizona can express its values through the careful creation of budgets and management of taxpayer dollars. He is currently running for state treasurer. So welcome to the three of you. I'm so glad that you could join us tonight. And I would love to just go ahead and get started with our first question for Alexandra. I'd like to know where Arizona's water comes from currently, because of course we are a desert state, and I think there's quite a bit of confusion around that.
Yes, there is, and we manage our water in different ways depending on where it comes from. So we have groundwater, which is in aquifers beneath us, and we withdraw that through wells. And we have surface water, which is basically our in-state streams, like the Salt River or the Verde River, and that's surface water also includes springs, and it includes something called subflow, which is basically the water that can be found beneath the ground, but right near the stream. And then we also have Colorado River water, and we legally treat that as a different kind of water, even though it is a river, so it's a kind of surface water, but there's different laws that apply to Colorado River water than apply to in-state surface water and groundwater. And then there's a fourth kind of water, which is effluent. And basically that is wastewater. So water that comes out of, for example, a municipal treatment plant is called effluent. And it's another form of water that can be used for many purposes.
So is that the same as reclaimed wastewater?
It has many names, and it kind of depends on what statute you're looking at or what, what the law is. But effluent, reclaimed water, recycled water, it's all the same thing, basically.
Okay, so we have four sources of water, basically, here in Arizona. So how is it distributed?
Well, so for municipal and industrial users, light industrial, it's generally distributed from a municipality or a private water company. And though they deliver water, through a infrastructure water, there's a water treatment plant usually. And then it's delivered to your home. They have a hookup at your home or at your business. For farms, usually they're managed through an irrigation district, and they have a distribution system. So they receive the water, and then it goes through a canal or different types of delivery systems. Farms and ranches can also use wells, and they can also have stock ponds that collect, surface stormwater or rainwater.
Okay.
And then a big, large industry uses, say, wells or diversion structures. So
we have, home users, we have irrigation for agriculture, and then we have commercial or industrial use, such as semiconductor fabs and water-cooled data centers and golf courses. How does it break down? Who are the biggest users of water?
So if you're looking at the state, agriculture uses around 70% of the water. And then there's municipal and light industrial users. And because they're kind of receiving water from the same source, you can't really separate those out. But I think around 30 to 35%. Yeah, so that's about what it is.
So agriculture is really the biggest water use.
Yes. By far, they definitely are.
Okay, so let's talk about groundwater for a minute. I've heard that groundwater accounts for as much as 40% of our total statewide water use. I've also heard that the groundwater dates way back, that a lot of it was laid down like during the last ice age, and it's not really being replenished. So can you explain the situation with our groundwater?
Sure. So yeah, you're right. The groundwater, when you're pumping groundwater, it's considered like mining a resource. And we are fortunate to have these really large aquifers under the ground. So a lot of people who come to, say, Phoenix, or to central and southern Arizona are always surprised that we have all this water under the ground. But we have been using it, and as technology developed for well drilling and to make more powerful wells, that just increased. And in 1980, we passed the Groundwater Management Act. It's also called the Groundwater Code, because we were basically mining more water than was being replenished. And so the legislature decided that we needed a law to protect those groundwater supplies and to get us more into what's called safe yield, where we're not withdrawing more water than is replenished. And so, but that law only applies in areas called active management areas. So it's basically the areas where the majority of the population lives. About 80% of the population live in the active management areas, but in the areas outside, there are really no groundwater restrictions on how much you can withdraw.
Okay. You mentioned that the Colorado River is a different kind of water, or that it's legally treated as a different kind of water. So there has been a lot in the news recently about cuts to Arizona's supply of Colorado River water. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yes, we are facing unprecedented challenges on the Colorado River right now. The hydrology is we are in the longest drought in recorded history, basically, and also the longest drought, people think, in about 1,200 years. So many of us believe that this is an example of climate change. And we can see that in the fact that even in years where we have good precipitation, so good snowpack in the upper basin, where the Colorado River headwaters are in the state of Colorado, and the Green River is the major tributary, and that the headwaters are in Wyoming. So we're talking about the snowpack there. Even when we have normal snowpack there, we're seeing lower inflows into Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And we think that's because of something we're calling aridification, which is just the hotter temperatures. It's melting earlier, the soil is drier, and so even in those normal years, we're seeing, between 30 to 50% normal in terms of inflows into those reservoirs. Colorado River, I could go on forever, and I know I don't have time. So what I'll just try to summarize. This year we were in a tier 1 shortage at Lake Mead. And then last August 16th, the Bureau of Reclamation declared that for next year, we are going to be in a tier 2A shortage. And those tiers are determined based on the elevations at Lake Mead. And there are the drought contingency plan that was something we worked on with the other basin states and Mexico and the United States. It's Colorado River is an interstate, international stream. We have to all work together when we decide on how to manage it. And the federal government is essentially the water master, so they have ultimate control over it, although they try to defer to the states. But a tier 2A shortage means that there's Arizona has to cut back 592 acre feet per year. And if you think about CAP's allocation is about 1.6 million acre feet, that's a pretty big chunk. So
can you tell us,
California takes 0 in a tier.
Tell us what is an acre foot? That's a sort of an arcane unit of measure that a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Yes, so we when we talk about water, we all talk about acre feet, and it is, but it's basically the amount of water it takes to cover an acre of land with a foot of water. And so you know, it came from our roots in, you know, in the West, doing farming, and but that's how we measure large quantities of water, you know, and we can also measure it based on gallons per minute or cubic feet per second. But generally, when we're talking about these large quantities, we talk about acre feet. And I like a 1 acre foot can serve like 3 households, family of 4 for a year, approximately. I've heard between 2 and 4, but.
So I Googled it because that's what I do when I don't know what something is. And I saw that it's enough water to cover an acre of land, which is about the size of a football field, 1 foot deep. And I also saw that use varies widely, that Phoenix uses more water than, say, a lot of folks in California, where the average family of 4 might use half an acre foot per year, and Phoenix is closer to 1. So I'm going to ask you later about conservation measures, but I want to switch speakers here for a minute. And Lauren, I want to ask you a question. This week, it's been in the news that the Gila River out in eastern Arizona is flooding the town of Duncan near the New Mexico border. And can you explain to our volunteers how we can be in such a drought emergency and at the same time we're seeing these historic floods?
Well, yeah, they're intimately, intricately connected as well. When you have such drought, the water loses its permeability, and so water runs off much more easily. And then when you have fires, we've seen incredible floods along the fire scar lines in north of Flagstaff, and that even makes the situation worse and contributes to flooding. So, you know, the soil loses its ability to really retain the water, and runoff becomes quite a serious issue. And as we become more of a man-made infrastructure, you know, we need to think about building more green infrastructure, not gray infrastructure, that allows us to capture rainwater and have it serve as an ecosystem service to water plants, or, you know, water areas that don't necessarily get watered. So yeah, there's such a strong connection between drought and flooding. And, you know, we're in they say the 1200th year of a drought. It's the longest drought we've ever experienced, and that's determined by, you know, scientific evidence. I know that sometimes it's hard to get people to wrap their heads around that, but it is very true, and we can determine that from tree ring data. We're in the worst flood in 1200 years, and I guess it's Alex, is it the 22nd year of our flood, or is it 25th? Sometimes I hear different numbers.
Yeah, I think 22nd year of our drought. Yeah.
So, did I say flood on my mind?
But yeah, I think we all knew what you meant.
I'm a little discombobulated because for the first time, even during COVID, never had computer problems. All of a sudden, it started making this really loud noise and shut down. So if that happens again, I'll try and get back in. But yeah,
So,
we're seeing areas across the state as I travel, people that are hauling water and having to fetch water more than ever before. Wells going dry. I mean, it's a significant crisis in rural areas of our state.
So I have actually heard that we should switch our terminology, and instead of referring to a drought, we should say long-term drying, because the word drought implies that we're going to come back to our previous normal. And what's happening is that climate change has shifted the trajectory, and the previous normal is no longer accessible.
That could be true. I mean, I like to say mega drought or historic drought. Whatever it is, I think we are looking at a long-term situation. And certainly, climate change, there's a relationship to climate change. It's not always, so cut and dry, but the evidence from the IPCC report as reported shows, direct and strong connection. And it's something we really need to plan for. And we're not currently planning for it in Arizona.
Just say just a little bit more about the difference between green infrastructure and gray infrastructure, if you would.
Sure. Well, gray infrastructure, let's think about sidewalks in a city. So you build these pavements and sidewalks and there's water runoff and it runs into, underneath the sidewalk, there's drains set up that capture the water. Instead of having that rainwater run off into, into the gutter, it could run off there could be cutoffs and have it run into an area that's landscaped with low water use plants. And then you have a service that you're supplying, an ecosystem service. You're watering hopefully trees and plants that tolerate that kind of a watering regime. And you don't have to have the water run off and potentially flood homes or flood streets. And instead it actually serves a purpose of building more landscaping and more shade in your community.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, my next question is for Martin. Many people might not see a natural connection between water and the Treasury. So let's start there. Tell us about that connection.
Yeah, definitely. First, it's great to be here with two water experts, way more experts than I am. So Alex and Lauren, these are the people that have the knowledge, way more so than I do. But a lot of people have been asking me, how does the Treasurer's office relate to the issue of water? And in one sense, it doesn't have to. Like if you have an office holder there in that Treasurer's office who is only interested in maintaining the status quo, then they're not going to really involve themselves too much with water decisions or use water to influence the decisions that you make as a state treasurer. So in a lot of ways that issue could just be ignored, and I think a lot of that has been happening already. But there's a lot that the treasurer could and should be doing to address water. One is just kind of being an advocate, being a voice for these water issues. Like I know we're going to get into it later, but that Saudi land water deal or land deal that was done, the treasurer has a role in those land leases and sales as well. And so to prevent that type of sale or lease because of the use of water, I think is a really important role that the treasurer should have exercised and hasn't. I think obviously if I'm in there, that's going to be something that we're going to be paying extra close attention to when we are making those sales or leases of state trust land. And secondly, and lastly, the investment decisions that the state treasurer makes. The treasurer has over $23 billion of the people's money that forms the investment portfolio, and making decisions about where to invest that money could be made based on the use of some of these corporations' water, their efforts to moderate their water use, and considerations of their other kind of social, governments, and environmental impacts of the decisions that those corporations make, and whether they are good decisions or not, and whether they're going to be good financial investments. Ultimately, determining if a lot of these corporations, determining whether they are making good and efficient use of their water is a good investment from the state's perspective. and that's going to give us a better return on our investment. So the responsible management of our money would be to evaluate that use of water as well. So those are really quickly two ways that the Treasurer's Office could be involved in water.
That makes a lot of sense. The Arizona legislature also spent a ton on water this year. In June, they passed a budget that includes $1 billion in water spending. And I know that that was partly earmarked for conservation measures, but mostly it was intended to be spent on what they're calling new water solutions. So can you break that down for us?
Yeah, sure. And I guess first, the conservation efforts in that bill, there was a lot of fight to put those into the bill, but I don't think it went nearly as far as it should have. And they're really that conservation aspect of it is one of the weaknesses, I believe, of that bill. It doesn't go nearly as far enough in terms of conservation measures as we really need to be responsible. But ultimately, what this package did is it, and I guess I want to preface that by saying, from our perspective, as Senate Democrats, we were looking to achieve a water deal that set Arizona up for success and created an infrastructure that would help us find some of these solutions. So that what it did ultimately is it modernized and expanded what is now the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. WIFA is what we call it at the legislature. And so it modernized and expanded this organization or this government agency to empower it to address urgent statewide challenges, and we wanted to do that in a transparent way and an inclusive way, so that as many voices and as many perspectives were at the table as possible. So that was a big effort in that, to make sure that if we are going to make major water decisions, all the parties are at the table and everyone has input in that sense. What it ultimately did is it considered the realities of our changing climate and the over-allocated Colorado River water, and also the decreasing groundwater levels that we just discussed. And it created a financial structure, and there was funding given to it to assist with the water needs of both rural and urban Arizona. Now, all it is really is an infrastructure to find those solutions. It didn't actually find those solutions itself already. It's just a method to find those solutions that has funding behind it. And there's $1 billion in funding behind that.
Okay.
Could I add to that? Could I add to some of Martine's criticisms? Because, it does nothing to limit groundwater pumping. And I think over 80% of the state and geographic area has no limits on groundwater withdrawal. And so that is concerns that it does nothing to limit groundwater pumping or even measure it. And there's no requirement for considering environmental impacts of some of these proposed projects. When you think about desalination, are we going to colonize Mexico and disrupt the ecology of the Sea of Cortez? I mean, seriously, there's some, desal is very interesting, but it also uses a lot of water and a lot of electricity to yield that water. So, I'm fundamentally really disappointed and the lack of true investment in water conservation and just throwing money at bringing in water in from other states is still business as usual, unfettered growth, growing alfalfa for Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's just a lot of disconnects there in that bill.
Yeah, and we will cover the Saudi land deal later. That was going to be one of my follow-up questions, was the unregulated, unrestricted, unlimited groundwater pumping that's draining aquifers across rural Arizona. And I know that there have been multiple attempts at the legislature to address that, but we have one lawmaker standing in the way, as I understand it, Representative Gail Griffin, who's considered something of an expert on water policy at the legislature, and she just doesn't want to have that conversation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and this really kind of goes to really the power that chairs of legislative committees have in the state legislature. If you're a chairman or a chairwoman of one of those committees, you have incredible power to even to set the stage of what is going to be discussed in that policy area. So, Representative Griffin, she is the chair of that committee, and she doesn't want to hear those issues. She doesn't want to hear those bills. And so any proposal that gets proposed, any good ideas or even not so good ideas, if they don't even come to the table to be discussed, they're dead on arrival. And so that's kind of what's been happening in the legislature because she has that power to do that.
Yeah, as an outsider, it feels sort of like an attempt to avoid having difficult conversations about our water and our water future. And I look at it and I wonder, we've got 7 million human beings living in a desert, and it's sustainability. Is that something that's attainable for us? And I don't expect any of you to answer that question. It's just something that I wonder regularly. But this legislative inaction has local impacts. Refusing to create policy that actually faces climate change head on is having a direct effect on Arizona. And so, Lauren, I wanted to ask you about the Rio Verde foothills community near Scottsdale. I saw in the news that they are going to be losing all their water by the end of the year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, they received their water traditionally from the city of Scottsdale, a municipal agency. And this is an area that's east of Scottsdale. It's north of Fountain Hills. And their water crisis, it's sort of one of the first examples in Arizona of the impact of the mega drought, I believe, on Maricopa County's residential water supply. So there is a big decision coming up with the Board of Supervisors, and all props to Supervisor Galvin. He's taken this issue in hand and he's trying to seek some resolution. I think there's a meeting that's coming up in 5 days, August 29th, to make the decision about what the projection is or where they should obtain their water. And there'll be a lot of public interest in attending that meeting. And if it isn't resolved somehow by mid-September, the Arizona Corporation Commission is going to take the issue in hand. But yeah, they're scrambling to find new ways to get water. And it's just a thorny issue. And we're seeing more and more issues like this pop up across the state. And these are, $1 million homes up there too. They don't have an assured water supply. And there's a lot of, it's a good story. 12 News did. I'm going to post it in the chat, not to watch right now. You might be interested in learning more about the situation. Eek. Because I know we don't have a lot of time here, but this is a really good Channel 12 story that explains the crisis in detail.
And I'm going to copy that and save that for later. So I love those sorts of follow-ups. And Alex, you mentioned active groundwater management areas. And I know that this is on the ballot in Cochise County, that voters in 2 rural basins are going to be voting on whether to create new active management areas. So can you tell us, I know that that's outside of Maricopa County, but can you tell us a little bit about that? Alex, you're muted.
Sorry, I had technical difficulties there for a minute. I lost connection. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was following up on your earlier mention of active groundwater management areas. And I know that that's going to be on the ballot in Cochise County. And wondering, I know that that's outside of your Maricopa County board expertise, but wondering if you can tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So, aside from serving on the board, I'm also a water resources attorney and have been doing that for several decades. So I do know a little bit about that, even though it's not really, doesn't really pertain to what I do on the board. So to create an active management area outside of the ones that currently exist, there's a couple of ways to do that. Well, 3 ways really. The legislature could do it. The Department of Water Resources under the statute is able to do it under certain criteria, or it can be done through a citizens initiative. And so that there are actually several areas in Arizona which are really facing a groundwater crisis. One of those areas is in Cochise County. I think We also hear about Mojave County as another one, but there's several different groundwater aquifers that are really at risk. Cochise County has been struggling for a while, and it's really, there's a lot of conflict there on how to move forward and manage those resources, but they did get enough signatures to put it on the ballot. And so I think those of us who want to protect the aquifers are excited to see if that might pass.
Okay, is this a way?
And then they would have an active management area there, and they'd have to get permits to pump groundwater, that kind of.
So this is a way then for them to address the legislative inaction of the unrestricted groundwater pumping that's happening in their communities. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about that Saudi land deal. It sort of keeps popping up as the elephant in the room. So for those who are unaware, in June, the Arizona Republic published this bombshell report detailing a state land deal with Saudi Arabia, which includes rights for them to pump unlimited groundwater. They're leasing land to a Saudi corporation for just $25 per acre per year. The water is being used to grow alfalfa for export. They can't grow their own because they've practically exhausted their own underground aquifers. So they're coming here and using ours. Lauren, I'm going to throw that to you. Tell us a little bit more about what sounds like a really bad deal for Arizona.
Yeah, it truly is. And, you know, this is the land department. This has been going on for years, apparently. And first of all, when you lease that land, you're supposed to pay, I think it's almost $800,000 just to be able to have the opportunity to use that land. I don't think they paid a cent. They're paying 1/6 the cost. The state land department says they're giving them half a discount. I mean, a 50% discount, but it's just not true. They're giving them a much bigger discount. They're paying $25 an acre, right? And they should be paying $150 an acre. But the state land department says, but now we don't have to do any improvements, and they have to do all the improvements. But what is really remarkable, you know, it's remarkable that in Arizona, the world's most water intensive crops are being grown during a mega drought when we have limited groundwater supplies. And what's truly remarkable is that they don't then pay per gallon. They don't even have to account for how much water they use. It's unlimited water at no cost. So they're just paying $25 an acre for that use. And they never paid for the rights to actually use the land. And so there's reports that it's up to $3 to $4 million a year of water that they're using. The value is that much money. Something fishy's going on. I know that Chris Mays, when she's elected AG, really wants to look into this arrangement because it does seem to be such a sweetheart deal for Saudi Arabia, and there's Saudi Arabian connections that go way back with Governor Ducey too. So it'd be interesting to look at it from that perspective as well. But it just it makes no sense. And this is all in the Butler Valley where, you know, families are starting to have to haul water. So there's a lot of, you know, popular resentment bubbling up, and there's a lot of, you know, good investigative reporters looking at the story. And I hope we get to the root of it even more than we have.
Yeah, so Martine, I'm going to ask you about adding insult to injury. They're not only drawing down this groundwater, which is earmarked as a future water source for Arizona at way under market rates. This money is supposed to be going to the state land trust. So can you tell us what that is, what it funds, and just more about that?
Yeah, so the state land trust is the pot of money basically that we've had and used, and we use the interest from that money. That's the money that the treasurer manages and invests the monies in that account, but we use the interest on that money basically to fund our schools. So that money does literally go to our schools from that land trust. It's also, people are more familiar with the land trust lately because of Proposition 123 that just passed a few years ago, and that's set to expire in the next 4 years. But so when we are selling that land or leasing that land at that under rate, that lowest rate, where you're basically stealing money that would have gone to our schools, because that would have been rent money basically if they're paying for that land, or purchasing that land, that would have gone into that trust, which then funds the interest funds our schools. So that is literally another way that we are underfunding education and really kind of poking holes into the funding structure of our public school system. So a whole different subject, public school funding versus water, but this is how they tie together. And this is kind of what I said at the beginning. This is the status quo. This is the norm for the way government operates in Arizona. So if we want to change that, we do need to make some changes to who are managing all of these things.
Mm-hmm. So back to you, Lauren, you mentioned Chris Mays, if she becomes elected as Attorney General, looking into this. Is this an Attorney General enforcement issue? Are there other ways to address this? Because it shouldn't be happening.
I'm sure there's many levels. I don't think a corporation commission would play a role necessarily, but Martine can maybe answer what the legislature could do. I'm certain that they could launch an investigation, and the governor certainly has a lot to do with as well. So it's important, I think, to let Katie Hobbs, who's going to try and uncover this. But there's been so much neglected in the Attorney General's office in the terms of Brnovich. We've just seen that no matter what your party is, to see the Attorney General's office so politicized is sad. Like, we see the consumer fraud, the elder fraud cases just not even present. They've just abandoned that. And Chris promises to actually restore the environmental division at the Attorney General's office, which is much needed division that's basically been ignored and not funded. There's much to be done, but there's a lot going on that has to be brought to the forefront. And we need to represent the interests of the Arizona taxpayers and Arizona residents, and not the corporations. And that's been the rule of thumb for the Ducey years.
Mm-hmm. So I do know that I've heard talk about a desalination plant, and it seems that we are we're going to just pump all our groundwater, but at the same time try and find new sources. And I want to ask you, Martine, about desalination, because I know that was discussed at the legislature a fair bit this year. Is that viable?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And kind of speaking from the scientific perspective, Lauren and Alex will probably speak better to that. But I think, the one thing to remember is that, there's not going to be any one single solution to this. So when lawmakers are putting all their eggs in one basket and talking about desal is the solution, they're not doing their due diligence to really kind of address this complex problem with a complex solution. I think that unfortunately at the state legislature, there is an extreme lack of expertise on this issue, on water in general. And so what the result of that is, one, just a lack of discussion on anything, and that goes to Representative Griffin and her refusal to hear bills. Part of that is political, but I think the other side is just lack of expertise and lack of knowledge. And two, talking about kind of pie in the sky solutions that aren't necessarily going to solve a problem, but it gives them something to campaign on. And they throw out a solution out into the public sphere for the public to talk about, and that just kind of distracts everyone from really kind of working on the real solutions. This is an option I think is kind of there's interest growing in it, all over, not just here in Arizona. And so even the kind of the markets is reacting to this interest as well. And I think there's going to be more growth in it in the next few years as well. But again, the solution is going to have to be more than just this.
So Alex, I want to ask you about the desalination plant, but also about a pipeline. I've heard some money was included in the Arizona state budget this year for a study into building a pipeline to carry water to Arizona from the Mississippi River. So these do strike me as slightly far-fetched, and I would like you to provide us with some background on them.
Sure. So I mean, I think that both desal and a pipeline are kind of long-term types of solutions that people are looking at to augment the water supply in Arizona. A pipeline from the Mississippi River or the Missouri River is something that's been talked about for many years, but really has never been pursued because there's a lot of problems with it. I mean, the question as an attorney that I always have is in terms of like water rights, and would we be able to even get the rights to use the water? Perhaps we would they would be willing to let us have some floodwaters, but I'm not sure. I think that would be really challenging. Then you have to cross, many different states. Sorry, I'm having a few technical difficulties tonight, but hopefully you can still hear me. So you'd have to cross many different states. You'd have to get permits, to have to go through NEPA permitting and a lot of different permits and from many different states. So, and then there would be the cost of it. But the technical part of it would be less difficult because, we have pipelines for other things. We have natural gas pipelines and that kind of thing. So I think that one, in my opinion, is a little bit far-fetched, but it would basically, there's kind of two ideas. One would be taking water from the Missouri River to Denver area, and then Colorado would leave more water in the Colorado to come downstream. The other idea is from the Mississippi River over to Lake Powell, and I think it would go through Kansas and New Mexico. So that one's both of those I think are pretty far-fetched, but I guess Central Arizona Project was pretty far-fetched at one point as well. So, and then the other one, Central Arizona Project has been involved in some feasibility studies for desal in the Sea of Cortez. And in California, they have a desal plant in San Diego, and then they have been trying to build another one in the Los Angeles area. But I think a permit was recently denied on that one. So the Sea of Cortez concept would be that a desal plant would be built. There would be two plants, and then it would provide water to Mexico. And then Mexico gets 1.5 million acre feet of Colorado River water. And so we would do an exchange. And that, so Arizona, if we invested in this, would be able to take the equivalent amount of water through the CAP. And then, and the feasibility study was for 200,000 acre feet. I think the cost for the water would be over $1,000 an acre foot. So it's pretty expensive compared to what we pay now. But water in California is more expensive, and it will be getting more expensive here. There's some environmental questions about what you do with the brine, which is essentially the salt once you've removed it from the water. And so, of course, in all of these feasibility studies, we're working with the state of Sonora and the Mexican government. And so if it were ever approved, it would have to be done in a way that respected that delicate, ecosystem in the Sea of Cortez. So.
And Alex, one thing too is like the enormous energy costs, right? Because the largest user of electricity in Arizona is the Central Arizona Project. So creating these pipelines, what it comes with also are enormous electricity issues.
Yeah, well, so in this case, the energy would be really to operate the desal plants. So it does take a lot of energy to essentially, push water through its reverse osmosis. So push water through the membranes and remove the salts. Mm-hmm. And there's some ideas that that could be solar energy used for those. The pipeline would not be that long because it would be delivered to Mexico. So the costs wouldn't be as much in that. I mean, there would be a cost for it. And so that's why it would be, you know, over $1,000 an acre foot for this desalinated water because of those costs. But, you know, and there's three different ways that you can dispose of brine. One, probably the most common one, is a long pipeline out into the ocean where it's, it's diffused. There's little holes. So a little bit is released as it goes. It's not all released in one spot. You can also create salt beds, essentially, just evaporate, and then you have to just find pieces of land to put all that salt. And sometimes people have found commercial uses for the salt if they do that. And the other way is to inject it into the ground. But that has some, so I think they're doing that in Texas. There's a desal plant there in El Paso, but there's some concerns about creating earthquakes or destabilizing the geology. So there's some challenges, but you know, I visited Israel and they have desalination plants all up and down the coast, and most of their municipal water supply comes from desalinated water. So I think it's a reasonable long-term solution for us to continue to look at as, you know, technology improves and energy efficiency improves.
But it wouldn't supply all of our water, would it? And you said it's expensive. So how does it compare to what water costs typically?
Well, I agree with Martine that there's no silver bullet. I mean, there's no one solution. And so the first thing we have to do is more conservation. There's a lot of places with a lot of things that we can do in terms of more conservation within the state. And we also can do a lot more with water reuse. We are a leader in that. Some of our communities like Scottsdale have great water reuse programs, but we can do a lot more with recycling, reusing our water. We can do a lot more with agricultural efficiency, using new technologies, new kinds of drip technologies. And there's not a silver bullet there, but there's different technologies that can, can get the same crop yield with drip irrigation on certain soils, certain crops. It's not going to be for everything. And so we need to do those things first. We are working on a joint collaborative water reuse project with Metropolitan Water District in California. And things like that we can do. We can also do local desal. So we have some saline groundwater we call brackish groundwater, and it's not as saline as the ocean, so it takes less energy to remove the salt. And we can do groundwater desalination more locally. So there's a lot of other things that we can do first, but you know, I think it's still worthwhile to continue to investigate ocean desal as a long-term solution.
Okay.
But could I add to that though? I mean, you think about when you put solar on your roof, the first thing you're supposed to do is do an energy audit to see what your roof can hold and what you really need. And so not to do the basic conservation measures that have been so neglected in the state. And, you know, I served in the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association for a number of years, and cities in central Arizona were doing the good work, you know, installing a lot of, you know, I'll look at the city of Tempe. We have free water audits. We offer free irrigation controllers for residents. We offer free consultations so you can develop a water budget. So when you do your updates and your irrigation updates, and we give you the free equipment for that you can really give the right amount of water to the right tree in the right time. And then we have smart meters. So if there's a leak in your house, you get notified within the designated time period that you provide. And so maybe your dishwasher runs an hour and a half. If there's any water running in your system over an hour and a half, you elect to get that information on a text or an email or by mail. I'd rather get it, instantly. And then we've been able to save billions of gallons of water that way because we're stopping leakage, we're saving water. And there's such a strong connection between saving energy and electricity and saving water. They're so connected. And for us to not really invest wholeheartedly in conservation, and the Arizona Corporation Commission doesn't regulate the municipal water authorities, water companies. It regulates the 350 private water monopolies. And a lot of those water monopolies, they're not up to date with a lot of equipment, irrigation updates, water audits. They don't do that kind of thing, and they plead poverty, which may very well be the case. But it seems like the money that the state is investing should be going to the rural areas that don't necessarily have the funds to really massively invest in energy and water efficiency.
So conservation is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I want to get into that a little bit more in just a few minutes. But first, I want to ask you all about water privatization, which is something that I've been hearing about. I mean, I consider water to be, a public good inherently, but privatizing our waters, investors could theoretically dry up farmlands, which you've said use the vast majority of water, and store the savings in a reservoir to sell to the highest bidder during the shortages. And I find that very alarming. So what are the odds of, do we need to be keeping an eye on water privatization? What is this all about?
Well, what we're seeing in Arizona with the non-municipal water companies is we're seeing consolidation, which is leading in some cases to rate increases. You'd think with water companies consolidating, it might be cheaper for everyone, but a lot of these water companies have not come before the commission and asked for a rate increase for many, many years. So people are seeing large spikes in their water bills, which is concerning. Yeah, I mean, I'm very deeply skeptical of privatization. And, I think there needs to be a certain level of water that a resident pays that's survival water, where, you have that money. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's $0, maybe it's just $10 a month, but you have a guaranteed amount of water to survive, because water is life. But we need to look at, someone mentioned about tiered pricing. Most of the cities, definitely in the Municipal Water Users Association, most of those cities have tiered water pricing, and you pay more for a lot of use of water. Like if you're using 120,000 gallons, there's 5 tiers set up in Tempe, and you're going to pay more for those last 20,000 gallons of water. So we need to have the rural areas also look at tiered pricing if they aren't already. But I'm deeply skeptical about privatization efforts.
Is this something that we need to keep an eye on? Martine, do you know?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And I think from my perspective, after serving in the state legislature for 10 years, I think any privatization of what should be a government service should raise red flags. And we should be really concerned and keep a very close eye on that, because when you do privatize something, profit becomes the #1 motivating factor, not what the original service is. And be that corrections, be that education, or be it water. And so I think that that profit motive is something to be concerned about. And we're seeing it happen right now. I'm just looking at the records of that the Arizona Republic investigation that found 8,863 acres of farmland in 3 Arizona counties in recent years were bought by one private corporation. They've amassed enough land in Yuma to really kind of start to freak the people out there in Yuma, because their water rights are in Yuma especially are among the most valuable on the lower end of the river. And there was others that had, there are 2 other companies that were over 8,500 acres in several areas of the state. And these companies are buying land and water rights, not just here in Arizona, but in places all over the West, in Western states. So this privatization effort, I think, is something that we should really be concerned about and keep a very close eye on.
Alex, I'm going to ask you too if you know anything about water privatization, if it's something we should be concerned about and watching for.
So Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I will try to answer it. And coming from a kind of lawyer legal perspective, water, under our state statutes, from the water code was enacted in 1919, and water is a public resource, and so all water is managed as a public resource, and it's there's a a public trust doctrine. However, you can have rights to use water, so people do have a kind of semi-property right in their right of use, but it is limited, and so it varies depending on what kind of water it is. So if you have a surface water right, then you have a right to use it unless you stop using it for 5 years. If you have groundwater is very different, and you can get permits for it. You can have a right for a grandfathered right under the groundwater code, but the legislature can put limitations on that. So we do have, without getting in the complexities of water law, we store water underground, and you can get credits for it, and those are traded. And then those rights of use that you have, they generally attach to the land. You can sell those. And so there is sort of this semi market, but there's a lot of boundaries around it. And for example, groundwater, you can't transport it outside of a basin, except for a few exceptions in the statute. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to manage water. I think you've seen for example, in Israel, it's very centralized. It's public, and the government decides how it gets distributed. In Australia, in this area called the Murray-Darling Basin, it's been kind of an example. They created the system of water markets where you get shares that can be traded, and there's some speculation going on and that kind of thing. So I would just say we have kind of a hybrid system here, I would say. And so I guess that's the best I can answer the question. I don't know exactly what we mean by privatization, but of course, I think water ultimately is a public resource that, the government's role is to make sure that the public is protected and the resources are protected.
I have seen talk of hedge funds getting involved, and anytime you see sort of that coded language, public-private partnership, that is a red flag for me about what I consider to be a public good. So thank you for your thoroughness. So you have all mentioned conservation at some point during this conversation this evening. And I want to talk about solutions. I saw a quote from a presidential science advisor who said that the climate challenge is simple. We have 3 choices: adaptation, mitigation, or suffering. And I think we'd all prefer not to suffer. So I'm very interested in knowing what your short and long-term solutions are for water in Arizona, and how you would put these into practice in office. So Martine, let's start with you.
Yeah, so obviously I'm running for a new office, running for state treasurer, but in this role, this is actually one of the primary issues in this race right now. Is this very issue, that the use of the consideration of environmental, climate, and water issues on investment decisions. Now, there's one way to label that, and they're going to use kind of a dog whistle label and call it woke decision making. But what it really is, and what that is, what they're referring to when they say they're anti-woke is really taking into consideration all of those issues when you make an investment decision, not just because of the direct return on that investment that you're going to get from that investment, but the other costs that are associated with it and that impact the rest of the community and the rest of your taxpayer dollars. So the question really is, should we be considering those factors? Should we be considering how much a corporation, what their water policies are in terms of conservation, in terms of moderation, or should we not be considering those things? There's a very black and white difference in the two candidates in this race in that sense. So just speaking about for me, if I get in there, I believe that those are absolutely critical considerations. I think that you have to, we have a moral and an ethical responsibility to consider the impacts on water, not only because of the actual water shortage that we have, but because of the impact it has on our economy. Water is money. And if there's less water, that means that it's going to be more expensive, and that's going to impact our economy. Ultimately, those things are going to happen. So, in order to create a stable economy and to maximize our investments and to make wise investments that are not only going to give us a good return, but are also going to protect our planet and save our planet. You have to make those considerations. So I do believe in considering all environmental issues, all water issues, all social governance issues, and all of those issues when making those investment decisions. That is really the main thing, because there is right now an effort in specifically in treasurers' offices all across the nation right now to eliminate those considerations altogether. And there's an organized movement, and of course it's funded by the fossil fuels industry, to eliminate all of those considerations and to label them as woke and to label them as being political in nature, when really it's just good money management to consider those things. And on top of that, the icing on the cake is that you're protecting your planet and you're conserving water. So I strongly believe in those considerations. I think my opponent doesn't, and that's going to be really the main difference between us.
Okay. Alex, same question. Solutions. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I like the quote, because I think it's a good way to kind of think about different types of solutions. In terms of mitigation, I think, well, some of the things that I've done, so I was elected in 2016, I've been on the board for 6 years. And I think we have to look at both mitigation and adaptation. So in terms of adaptation, the Central Arizona Project is the largest user of electricity in the state. And the Navajo generating station was built to power the canal. And it was the third largest producer of carbon in the country. So in 2019, that plant was closed. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why. A lot of it had to do with prices and economics. But that gave us an opportunity to diversify our energy portfolio and transition to renewable energy. So we now entered into a contract for a solar project, and that phase 1 was completed, and phase 2 we're hoping to be completed in 2023. So I feel very good about that, because that's one of the things that I ran on in 2016. And so, to see that happening and to see a greater transition to renewable energy, I think is a really good thing for Central Arizona Project to address, to adapt climate change. And then the other thing is, in terms of conservation, one of the things that I've done, I'm a secretary of the board and chair of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District and Underground Storage Committee. It's a mouthful, but basically, I had our committee take a look at, we had a policy about conservation, and I had them evaluate that, and we're in the process of updating our policy, and we've been working with some stakeholders to develop new ways to incentivize conservation. And I'm really excited about it, but I can't announce it because we're going to announce what our program is at my next committee meeting. So I don't want to jump the gun, but we're working on different ways to incentivize new construction to use more efficient fixtures and provide funding for turf removal and more efficient irrigation systems and that kind of thing. And then the other thing is we are supporting new technologies for agriculture. So one is that we're funding some pilot projects with a technology called NDRIP, which the company is originally from Israel, where 80% of their agriculture uses drip irrigation. And so we're doing a pilot project on the Colorado River Indian Tribes Reservation, and also another one in the West Valley. And it's small scale right now, but we're looking at how that technology works. And if you're able to get the same kinds of yields with less water, and hoping to, find a way so that we can continue to have agriculture in Arizona, but use less water doing it. So that's what I would do, is work on, I guess the other thing that I think is really, really important is to stabilize the system. And what we're putting a lot of our energy into is negotiations with the other states, the other 7 states in the basin and Mexico, and trying to negotiate an agreement to recognize that the Colorado River is not supplying the amount of water. Basically the average is 9 to 11 million acre feet, and not the 15 to 17 or 18 that we originally thought. And we are really advocating that system losses and evaporation, 1.2 million acre feet, needs to be shared equitably and immediately cut back from all of the states, and then internally they can figure out how to distribute that. So that's complex, but I think those are the kinds of things that I will continue to try to advocate for and do if I'm elected.
And I have found it a comfort the last 6 years knowing that you are in office looking at some of these problems and solutions to these problems. So Lauren, same question.
Sure. So we can ask how individuals can save and how businesses can save. And, Tempe has a program with Local First Arizona to help businesses become certified, sustainably certified in water saving and such. But it's really not about, an individual resident uses like 70% or more of their water on landscaping. And so we have to encourage a culture of conservation, but it's about much more. We're not going to get to where we need to get to if we're just talking about individual behavior and basically blaming the consumer, blaming our residents. We need to set larger policy signals. And 16 years ago, we established a renewable energy standard. That was Chris Mays and Bill Mundell who established that. They were both Republicans at the time, by the way. And I was 15% renewable energy by 2025. That renewable energy standard saved us 23 billion gallons of water. So there is such a deep connection between water and energy conservation. And when you think about energy efficiency, if you want to get to 100% renewable energy goal, you get a third of the way there by energy efficiency. And proof to the point, and we can prove this with scientific data, 15 years ago with Sandra Kennedy and Chris Mays, they passed the first renewable energy efficiency standard in the country. And that helped us to avoid the building of 15 additional power plants, which translates into $9 billion, right? $9 billion. So the culture of conservation that we need to inculcate, if that's the right word, it's not just about water, it's about energy. And I really appreciate Alex bringing up the Navajo generating station, because the aquifer there, the Navajo aquifer right by Black Mesa, it took millions of years to build up. It took 50 years to drain, 50 years. All that water used and all the pollution that was engendered from basically building Tucson, building Tempe, building the big cities of Arizona. And right now, only I think a third of Navajo Nation residents have running water. And so when we talk about water in Arizona, we have to talk about equity. We have to talk about ways we can bring equity to the Navajo Nation, the Hopi lands, and other rural communities that are shuttering coal plants, but there has to be a process for a just and equitable transition that enables them to have running water, electricity. 70% of all the unelectrified homes in the entire country are in the Navajo Nation. So I contend that is a stain upon our state, and we need to take action. And part of that is having a renewable energy standard adopted. We failed to do that in January after 3 years of hard work. It was not adopted. And we're debating and talking about an energy efficiency standard, but that expired in December. And we know, like, the cheapest form of energy is to avoid building power plants and avoid using energy is the cheapest and best form of energy. So my message tonight is to connect all of those things together: water savings, energy savings, and then use an equity lens in every policy that we conceive of, because we need to ensure that all Arizonans have access to safe and plentiful water, and that they have access to cheap energy, and that should be powered by the sun.
All right. I'm struck listening to the three of you by not only how complex this issue is. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface in this hour and 15 minutes, but on how many different agencies and elected offices have to do with water and the importance of our choices, not just this November, but overall. So is there anything that you would like to leave us with as we close? Alex, I'll start with you.
I guess I would just like to emphasize that we really are in unprecedented times on the Colorado River. I mean, we're facing a crisis that is like nothing we've seen before. And so with all of the planning that we've done and all the work we've done, it's still not enough. And so we all need to work together. I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, all sectors, whether it's agricultural, municipal, industrial, Indian tribes, we all need to work together to build an ethic of conservation and just understanding that we're living with this limited resource, and it's life, right? It's essential, water. I think, I hope that you will remember my name, Alexandra Arboleda, Central Arizona Water Conservation District. It's a nonpartisan race, so it doesn't say what party we are. There's 14 people running. And I am one incumbent. The other incumbent is Ben Graff. And there's Jim Peterson and Eleni Aguilar are also running and they're Democrats, but it's a nonpartisan race, so you won't see that. So we're asking for your vote, and my website is alexandra4az.com. And I would say it's really important to have people on the board who have expertise, have experience in water issues, because these are very complex issues, and who share your values about sustainability for the future. So I hope that you will vote for me.
How many seats are there going to be?
There's there's 15 board members, but we have staggered elections. So 5 seats are open every 2 years. So there's 5 you can vote for up to 5 people on the ballot.
Okay, all right. Martine, I'll go to you next.
Yes, I'll start off by saying you can vote for 5 in that, but only vote for the 4. We got those, yeah, those are, yeah, so that's really important. And I guess I wanted to kind of close with that as well. You know, in the state legislature, there was already a lack of institutional knowledge about water, and even some of the members of our caucus that were really knowledgeable are leaving. So there's going to be just a dearth of institutional knowledge. So I think that makes races like the Corporation Commission and the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board that much more important, especially where we are in terms of just water in general, and just the climate crisis that we're in right now. We're going to really have to rely on Lauren and Alexandra's expertise in these next several years, I think. And so I consider these 2 offices 2 of the most important on the ballot. And there's a lot of really important races out there, but these 2 should not be, you know, you shouldn't think of them any lower than any others. So that's the big thing. I think, you know, aside from that, you know, we are nowhere near prepared to deal with climate change. And there's a lot of just flat out denial coming from that other side, and they're digging their heels in. And so if we care about really just kind of saving our planet and saving our future, the next generation of Arizonans, our kids and our grandkids, you know, we need to take action now, and we really need to get moving now. And so I'm confident in the people that we have running. I know they've got my vote, and yeah, I'd be happy to be back here with you and talk about this or any other issue in the future.
Right. And before we close with Lauren, I want to read this verbatim out of the chat. This is from Kathy. Water is an issue that should not be politicized. All of Arizona depends on our water future. We definitely need to elect candidates with realistic solutions. So just think about that as we head toward the November election. So Lauren, what would you like to say as we close?
Well, I like to say that I know that climate is the great convener. There's a group called the Center for the Future of Arizona. It was started by Laddie Core, and it's led by Sybil Francis, who's the spouse, and she's very important in her own right, but the spouse of Michael Crow. And they did an exhaustive Gallup survey that showed that 74% of Arizonans want to see a transition to a clean energy economy. And they did another study that just the results have been released on the past couple months about environmental issues, education. You might look to what they're saying voters want when you do your education event coming up. But they said determined that 95% of likely voters support securing Arizona's water future and addressing a long-term drought, and that 94% support the statement, the drought only continues to worsen. It's increased the intensity of our fire season, enforced a declaration of water shortage, and like me, we need to do something to protect our water future. Now, you might wonder, like, who are the 6% that don't support that statement? But it brings the point that's been said tonight, that we have almost equanimity on these issues. Climate is the convener, and it's just maybe our politicians that aren't doing their job. But in the case of water, we have a history as a state of coming together. We did it for the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. It's in all of our interest to conserve, to set policy signals that benefit all Arizonans, especially those most vulnerable. And I believe that these are issues that we can bring, that people can come together on. We've done it in the past. We can do it again. Arizona can do big things. And so I'm running for the Corporation Commission, the most important office that no one's ever heard of, because I believe that there should be more consumer advocates on the commission, solar advocates and corporate watchdogs, and that we can work to set policy signals that will really help to drive the clean energy transition and create a sustainable water future for us all.
I like that a lot. And you mentioned the Center for the Future of Arizona poll, and CEBV has shared that again and again this year. It really is striking how much agreement we all have on the big issues that matter, like water. So thank you all for an extremely informative, rounded presentation. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. And please join us for our next Spotlight conversation on September 15th on education. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, panelists.